Trumping Kamalanomics, Nordstream whitewash, and waltzing between China and Israel? The Monica Perez Show starts now. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for showing up. I did like 4 shows yesterday. So if you're feeling like a little variety, you can check out. I was on AM Wake Up, Tinfoil Hats, Trad Cat Night, and I did the 7th installment of the Octopus book reading, which I put on the podcast feed every Saturday morning. So if you're doing the laundry or whatever you do Saturday mornings and you want to get into a routine, my aim is to always put a book chapter up on Saturday mornings. And if you don't like the commercials, remember there is a premium option on iTunes. It's not even $5 a month, which is the price of one newspaper, which I'm gladly reading in lieu of all you having to read it. And I'm going to tell you about what's in the news today in that newspaper. Really funny. I mean, the Wall Street Journal just really cracks me up today. But the bigger story, so I'll tell you what the Wall Street Journal said about it, and it's so preposterous that it's laughable. But the story that caught my eye was Germany has issued an arrest warrant for a Ukrainian who had been hiding in Poland. The arrest warrant is for the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines. So that guy, his whereabouts are unknown. They think he went back to Ukraine. And I thought they might have actually been making progress on this. So I think it was Denmark and maybe Sweden and Germany. Denmark and Sweden might have been the ones who it was the territory of theirs that the Nord Stream pipelines were in, the piece that got sabotaged. So this was in 2022. And I thought, well, they stopped their investigation, but Germany didn't. And my original line of inquiry was going to be like, oh, well, that Olaf Scholz completely rolls over left and right for whatever we say. But maybe they have like a slightly different structure there, or a structure where investigations like this are independent of the prime minister. I just don't know. Sometimes they have like different rules. So I thought maybe the guy just kept going because Sweden and Denmark stopped looking, but Germany apparently continued to look. And I thought, and wow, they caught the guy, and they're fingering Poland and Ukraine, which obviously means the US and the UK, because neither of those countries are going to go off and do something like that without us. And with Germany, so there's the backstory here, and this is why Angela Merkel, who was the German prime minister for so long, many, many years, and she did not completely capitulate with the West. She was East German, first of all, and she understood the value of getting gas from Russia. So she cooperated with them with these Nord Stream pipelines that brought gas from Russia to Germany and Europe generally, I think. And Nord Stream 1 was up and running. Nord Stream 2 was about to be opened, and there was a South Stream. So Nord Stream was the North Stream. There was a South Stream that also like stopped. I actually think the Ukraine and Syria, I thought for a long time that the origins of those conflicts were that Syria was instrumental in kind of blocking the South Stream pipeline, or they made a deal with Qatar or Russia or whatever to get that. There's a huge gas field underneath Qatar. I think it maybe shares with, could it share with Yemen? I don't know, but it could have gone up through Syria, and Syria said, no, we're going to deal with the Russians and not deal with you. And I think that could have been part of the problem. I think Pablo Escobar used to say like Pipelanistan or something. So anyway, these pipelines were really important, and Angela Merkel wouldn't give up on them, and wouldn't really ostracize Russia because of that relationship, seems to me. Olaf Scholz, who replaced her, has rolled over every step of the way. In the beginning, he didn't know what to do, and then he just finally totally capitulated. But the gas from Russia to the US is at the heart of the entire Ukraine thing. Like, I know it's gotten to the point where it seems like they're trying to promote World War III, but the start was Yanukovych, who was the democratically elected president of Ukraine, at the end of 2013, he decided he was in talks with Europe about trade deals and stuff like that. But Russia came to them with a good deal to give them cheaper gas, cheaper loans, and better trading terms than Europe was willing to give them. And Yanukovych said, okay. And that was the end of Yanukovych. So these gas pipelines were really serious. And I remember many years ago, Hillary Clinton saying, look, it's all about gas to Europe. Our problems with Russia, if people would just stop buying gas from Russia. And in place of that gas, we send over liquefied natural gas, which is super dangerous, totally inefficient to liquefy gas, ship it over, build ports to receive it. Like, you have to really eliminate that cheap alternative that makes sense for Europe and those people over there to get the gas from Russia. So this was a big deal. And then when the sabotage happened, here was one hysterically laughable thing, was that the West was saying that Russia did it. Like, they can't even make up a reason why Russia would do it. We wanted to stop that pipeline. And we stopped the Nord Stream 2 from opening, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So then Seymour Hersh, who, I mean, I think does anyone not think he's, whatever, compromised? He promoted that he used to be like kind of Democrat 9/11 hero, like the original maybe Blue Anon, saying like it was a Republican inside job. But I don't know what happened to him. Anyway, maybe he came to heel when Obama started covering up that fact. I don't know. But anyway, he was tasked with saying, oh, it was NATO. It was this NATO operation, and that made the news. And now Germany is saying that one man and a couple hired a boat, a yacht, went to the place they wanted to go, put on scuba gear, had a bag full of explosives, swam down, lit up all those pipelines. 3 out of 4 of them successfully breached. Lots of gas escaped. And that was that. And they timed it around the time that NATO was doing operations there to give themselves a little bit of cover. So that's the story. I'm like, okay, that doesn't sound right. And then the story goes deeper to say, well, it wasn't totally like these rogue actors. Ukraine and Poland were in on it together, and Zelensky had given the order, but then the CIA found out about it and was like, oh, you better not do that. And Zelensky said, okay. So he called back his guy, and the general said, I'm sorry, I already pressed the red button. There's nothing I can do. Those couple of guys with their scuba tanks are unstoppable now. Just it's like Mission Impossible. They're out there. We can't get them back. So this exonerates, I guess, to some extent, Zelensky and Ukraine and all of that. I don't know. So I no longer think that Germany's really cracking the code on this, because the idea that that there were rogue actors or anything, even in banking, I remember, if you had questions like, is this right? Like, what's the ethical answer to how you phrase this or whatever? And my boss said, ask the lawyers. The lawyers know the laws. Ask them. We pay the lawyers. There's never any reason to make these decisions on your own. Like, and you might not know everything. Just don't do anything that you don't. Just ask them. So I realized then that people don't, some general isn't going to go rogue at the risk of getting, go sideways of the U.S. Anyway, but that is the story that's being unrolled. It's very hilarious, the Wall Street Journal story. Here's the headline. A drunken evening, a rented yacht. The real story of the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. And in case you're not going to read this ridiculous article, it has a super long subtitle that says, private businessmen funded the shoestring operation, which was overseen by a top general. President Zelensky approved the plan, then tried unsuccessfully to call it off. So that's all you need to know. Just put that in your brain, and you can repeat it at your dinner conversation later on. So here's the article. I'm going to actually just read it to you because it reads like fiction, which it is. And I mean, it seems obvious to me it's fiction. Can I prove that it's fiction? I know, but somebody might soon enough. And somebody maybe can already, probably Putin. All right. It was the kind of outlandish scheme that might bubble up in a bar around closing time. In May of 2022, a handful of senior Ukrainian military officers and businessmen had gathered to toast their country's remarkable success in halting the Russian invasion. Buoyed by alcohol and patriotic fervor, somebody suggested a radical next step: destroying Nord Stream. After all, the twin natural gas pipelines that carried Russian gas to Europe were providing billions to the Kremlin war machine. What better way to make Vladimir Putin pay for his aggression? Well, I would say it's the way they actually did, which is they conducted a total violent, bloody coup against Ukraine, which we heard in the clip of the last show, Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt plotting that, and then subsequently sending in neo-Nazis like the Azov Battalion to kill 14,000 Russian-speaking Ukrainians who were disenfranchised the day the coup took power. That's one way you could get Putin back for for shipping gas to Ukraine cheaply. you know, just over 4 months later, 4 months is all it took. In the small hours of September 26th, Scandinavian seismologists picked up signals indicating an underwater earthquake or volcanic eruption hundreds of miles away near the Danish island of Bornholm. They were caused by 3 powerful explosions and the largest ever recorded release of natural gas equivalent to the annual CO2 emissions of Denmark. One of the most audacious acts of sabotage in modern history, the operation worsened an energy crisis in Europe, an assault on critical infrastructure that could be considered an act of war under international law. That's, I'm sure, true. Theories swirled about who was responsible. Was it the CIA? Could Putin himself have set the plan in motion? I always laugh when I read media speculation about some huge operation involving secret services, submarines, drones, and satellites. One officer who was involved in the plot said, "The whole thing was born out of a night of heavy boozing and the iron determination of a handful of people who had the guts to risk their lives for their country." See what I mean? Anyway, and their country being Zelensky-run Ukraine. I sincerely doubt, again, that that guy is inspiring loyalty in actual military people. So the last sentence I'll read you is Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky initially approved the plan, according to one officer who participated and 3 people familiar with it. But later, when the CIA learned of it and asked the Ukrainian president to pull the plug, he ordered a halt, those people said. So he takes their orders, but he doesn't ask their permission. Okay. There was actually a time when Poroshenko, who was the chocolate king, whatever, he was, I think it went like Yanukovych, and then they put in Yatsenyuk on the inside and Klitsch and Tanyabuk on the outside. That's the clip we heard in the last newsreel, which was probably 1 week ago. No, 2 days ago, the 13th of August, 2024. And so after that, they elected, I guess, they held an election and Poroshenko was the next president. I think it was Poroshenko, who did some operation in Crimea because they were having a referendum in Crimea. Did they want to stay with Ukraine, where everyone in Crimea, their first language, I believe, almost everyone is Russian, and the Ukraine coup said you can't use Russian in official capacity. So these people could not function, politically. So when given the option to go to Russia, it was almost unanimous. They voted to go to Russia. But Poroshenko wanted to mess around with the election, I believe is the story. But I did hear a clip from Biden telling Poroshenko, I should have played that clip, telling Poroshenko, hey, you don't get to decide what operations you pull. We decide. You do stuff like that, you ask us, or there will be consequences. And Poroshenko's like, yeah, right, sorry, won't happen again. If anyone knows who he works for, it's Zelensky. There's not, in my opinion, there is absolutely no way he's going rogue. No chance. Why take chances like that when all he has to do is follow orders and he gets his however they reimburse him for this. So his bank accounts, I don't know. There were some articles about that going around for a while. So I think that's a ridiculous story. And uh, I presume that we did it and that the US did it, maybe the UK, maybe NATO in concert. I don't know. It's, it was always about the gas. So that would be something that if it could be done, it would have been done by the powers that be. All right. Another big story today in the news was this headline that Kamala Harris wants to let me get it right. Food and grocery bills are hurting Americans. Harris will unveil the first ever gouging ban. So I don't know if you have known me, you know the whole concept of gouging makes me crazy, just triggers me. Even during COVID, I was like, let them gouge. Let them gouge. Let's talk about that. But first, it coincides or it's about inflation. But today there was big news that the market is up. I mean, I don't know if it's hitting new highs, but last time I looked at it, the Dow was over 40,000. And like last week, people were freaking out. I don't know what's happening. It's maybe bouncing around. I don't know what's happening, but it's up because inflation numbers were down. And if inflation goes down, so the reason the Fed they're saying they're keeping rates high is they want to control inflation and they can't cut rates if inflation is not under control. If inflation's under control, they may be able to reduce rates, and that takes a lot of pressure off of people. They feel richer. They are richer if they can refinance their mortgages, or the companies they buy things from have lower interest payments. So inflation is already on the way down. If she were to go through with price controls on groceries are already going down again. So it could be like what I always think vaxes are about. When the disease is in abeyance, then uh, the vaccine looks like it's working, and you're not going to roll the vaccine out until you see that the diseases are in abeyance. So if inflation is on its heels, that would be a good time to take action that you're going to take credit for that. But price controls are terrible policy. They create shortages, and also that supply chain fuckery during COVID created shortages. I mean, you can still see empty shelves. Like, we have gotten used to less variety. There are articles about this. I predicted it. You can see that still. And the way it works, obviously, is what she said, let me give you quotes so I can tell you why. She said there's a Harris on Friday, tomorrow, will call for the first ever federal ban on price gouging from food and grocery industries, hitting on a policy that is among the top concerns for many Americans. Well, inflation is of concern. I wouldn't say that policy. It will be of concern if she actually does it. She says there's a big difference between good business that's responsive to markets and excessive prices that are unrelated to the costs of doing business. That's what the campaign said in a release of the proposal. There's a big difference between being responsive to markets and excessive prices that are unrelated to the cost of doing business. So when you go to Kroger or whatever, do you think they could get away with charging like $40 for a 6-pack of beer? Why not? Why can't Kroger get away with charging excessive prices that have nothing to do with good business or market demands? Why can't they do that? Because you would go somewhere else. And as it happens, there's a merger afoot between Kroger and Albertsons, and they're looking at it for an antitrust thing. I think Harris actually talks about it by name. And the idea is, well, if Kroger tries to sell you 6-pack of beer for $40, what's your alternative? To go to Albertsons. But if Kroger owns Albertsons, then Albertsons is going to charge $40 for that same 6-pack of beer. And then what would you do? What would you do? You know what you would do? You would go to Costco, you would go to Trader Joe's, you would go to Grocery Outlet, you would go to Sprouts, you would go to any of those other places. And guess what? I wonder if I have this quote. It was pretty good. The guy from one of the guys from the I think it was Kroger or Albertsons, like a CEO said, all the FTC is looking at just grocery stores that are in the exact same niche as Albertsons and Kroger's. They're not including any of the things that I just listed: Trader Joe's, Costco, none of that, grocery outlet. They're not actually counting that in their assessment. And before I even read that, I had written, first of all, the banking I did was in bonds, like small companies that needed money. They would sell bonds privately and they would get like $100 million and I'll pay you back in 10 years. But a lot of those went belly up. They were very high rate. It was kind of like, it was high yield bonds. So it was, there were like I forget what they called them, but in the beginning, they were fallen angels. They were like bonds that were undervalued because they were really hitting the skids. And then it just became an industry where if you really wanted it, you could get it for 10% or whatever was a very high rate. And the bond funds would buy like 10 different ones. They'd buy $10 million of 10 different issues, and a couple of them would go bankrupt, but the rest were pretty high price. So they would make their money over time. It was a fund. So a few of them went bankrupt. So another section of the department I worked in was called restructuring. So if somebody got over levered and they had to reduce their leverage because they couldn't make their interest payments, you'd go and negotiate with the bondholders, and they'd have to capitulate because otherwise the company's just going to go under, kind of like our country is going to. Might. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So so I would work on bankruptcies occasionally, and supermarkets and airlines were the two. Maybe it doesn't happen anymore, but they were the two industries that went bankrupt repeatedly. They were just very competitive. They were very hard they were just constantly running specials, cutting costs to get people in there. They needed the volume. So when I saw the reason that they're probably combining is they probably need to, because food, there was a huge surge during COVID of the food demand and people were stockpiling, but it has since collapsed. So I think that's true generally. I don't know specifically for those two supermarkets, but generally I think that even across the market, when you see those kind of consolidations, a lot of times it's because things are cheap because they're not doing great. Anyway, so they're trying to stand in the way of this stuff. There aren't, in answer to her claim, excess prices can only really happen when there's a policy that prevents competition. So if you have like regulatory barriers to entry where you have to have an entire OSHA department or a labor department or an accounting department that, just huge burdensome tax reporting requirements that a small business could not possibly be able to adhere to. So then only big businesses can even exist. Or if you have something called a natural monopoly, where I built a giant dam, I own it, and it's the only way to make electricity for 1,000 miles in any direction. Well, I would argue with you about, even if that ever happens, that if there really are natural monopolies to anything at all, that all monopolies may be policy related. But in this case, there are so many substitutes, not only just stores, not only just other stores, but the substitute for food is growing potatoes in your backyard. I mean, it is cheap. Like, there is not scarcity when it comes to food. And what they're talking about, higher prices like this, what's really hurting you is they like this system where for convenience and whatever, you are beholden to the packaged food and all of that. And when the idea that she needs to control the prices comes from this underlying assumption that if you let the prices actually rise to where the people who value it most will buy it at the higher prices and the people who don't will buy something else, the underlying assumption seems to be people can't really afford it even though they really need it. And that, I mean, we have like the welfare floor is something like $40,000 a year. people work. Like the poor are actually taken care of. So do you need to subsidize prices if you also have welfare? I mean, it's just, and when you start doing that, if you start putting caps on prices, you get shortages because the companies will say, okay, well, if I can't charge X for bacon, and I'm sure that's where it'll come in the most, if I can't charge it X for bacon, I'm just not going to carry bacon anymore. And then they can either use the policy to decide what they want in grocery stores, or they can go one step further and say, we are going to require that you make the stuff available at this price. And then that you really get into micromanaging. And one thing that happened in the 70s, there was a huge gas shortage, huge long lines. And the reason for that was that Nixon had instituted price caps. So there's only a certain amount of gas available at that price. But also, if you have less gas than people want at that price, they're going to buy it all. What can you do to make ends meet, to pay the rent? If you can't charge what you need to charge to make it profitable enough. What they did was they would cut staff. So if they used to have like 3 workers, they would just cut it down to 1, and he'd pump 1 car at a time. And he knew you would wait. If you left the line, you left the line, but you're probably running out of gas by then. So that's exactly what you would do if she starts cutting into your margins. And this is not a hyper profitable industry as a general rule. So anyway, prices are coming down regardless. The food prices climbed only 0.2%. Energy was flat. 90% of the inflation came from a 0.4% increase in shelter costs. And I think it's a 0.4 like percentage point increase, that contributed to the overall 2.9% increase since it says the 12-month inflation rate is 2.9%. It's lowest since March 2021. By the way, automotive prices continue to decline, but insurance costs climbed another 1.2% for the month and are up 18.6% on a 12-month basis. So housing and autos, which are 2 things I think Big T, they don't want you to have anymore. Insurance prices are contributing to the cost of that and pushing down the, affordability. Another thing Rick Scott said, which I have to call BS on, he said there was data showing that eggs cost over 19% more than a year ago. And I immediately thought that's because they're killing all the chickens. And I found from January, I think we talked about this then, egg shortages arise as millions of chickens lost to bird flu in California. Lost to bird flu. They weren't lost to bird flu. They were euthanized. And if you go looking for bird flu, you're going to think that you found it in these chicks because they're very close together. They get burned from the heat lamps and they get sores. And sometimes those sores get infected from all the poop that's around. So when you look at the birds, a lot of times they look sick and a lot of them are sick. But if it was really bird flu, the last thing you want to do is kill them all. What you want to do is if you have a million birds like that anyway, you contain it and let the bird flu kill the ones that are susceptible to bird flu if it's fatal. And then all the ones that are left should be your breeding stock because they're the ones who are now immune to that. And what they're doing here makes it worse. So anyway, I could go on, but not everybody's as interested in how pricing works as I am. It's just so obvious. It's so obvious. And when like these crimes against math make me, well, as my son's high school math teacher used to say, but I don't know if it was in regard to math, it would make him filled with rage. Like this makes me filled with rage to that math abomination. But I did want to tell you one thing before we get to comments that about the national debt. Very predictable, very alarming to the point where nobody even talks about it anymore because I think there's absolutely, there's no real plan. There was a plan a long time ago that would have worked, and I don't know who torpedoed it. Really would have worked. It was a bipartisan plan, but whatever. So the deficits, the deficit for 2024 is going to be close to $2 trillion. And I was thinking, why is it so high? So before COVID, they were back up to 1 trillion. During COVID, they were like around 3 trillion. But now I think they backed off quite a bit in maybe last year, but now it's up to 2 trillion again, almost 1.9 trillion. And of course, I looked and said, it's because the interest rates are so high, I think, and ends up 0.9 trillion. So it's 1.9 trillion is the deficit. 0.9 trillion of it are interest costs, because we borrowed so much money when there were 0 interest rates or close to it. And so in 2020, the interest bill was 345 billion. So it's like 2.5 times that now. And boy, it's going to keep going. It is going to be, in 10 years from now, it's predicted to be $1.7 trillion. So this entire deficit that I think is shockingly large, and it's hard to shock, with this kind of debt, that entire thing will be the deficit. So we will be, I would say that's like effectively insolvent. You really don't have a penny. You're not generating a penny that can go to interest. And what are they going to do? What are they going to do? I just don't know. So let us. Trump, let's see if Trump had any economic. He was supposed to make a speech on economics. He said he was going to basically warp speed energy infrastructure like day one, even though we are right now producing more, I think, oil or energy than any country in history. He wants to do that. Nowadays, when I hear about energy, I just think it's AI. They want to build it up for AI, which is not our friend. We're not even going to have access to it. It's a government thing. It's really nuts. He did predict that Harris, if he wins the election, there will be an economic crash and a 1929 style depression. I wouldn't be surprised, because that's when you can usher in draconian new laws. So like a new deal, more or less. And it would be perfect, because it would give people DEI, derangement syndrome. Because you'd see this like chick. Anytime I see a chick in charge, like you see it in Europe a lot, it just feels so DEI. And if you see Kamala there, it's gonna feel DEI. and if there's a collapse, like it'll be the perfect fodder to feed this ideological divide that they've been nurturing for so long. So let us hit a few comments, and then maybe we'll do a little bit about Tim Walz. All right, let's keep it. So when I have too many, the chat, then I end up just letting Bobby put the starred comments up there. So you can see your starred comments, but I can't see anything that isn't starred. So let's start with the Burning Beard. Hi. Seymour Hersh is a gatekeeper, limited hangout master. Yeah, I think that's true. Stella says news is not news. It's riddles. That's so true. Maybe that's why it engages me. It could be why I actually, even though I am repelled by lies, I'm still engaged by some of these stories. That's why I picked the stories. I picked the stories that I feel like are need to be solved. I'm going to solve the news. Nice. Thank you. Nate says Kroger operating margins are in line with their 5-year wage inflation. With their 5-year. Wage inflation is the biggest current contribution to prices at the moment. Yes, I noticed that. So Biden was bragging about that. He said that the wages were up like, what did he say? Did he say 17% of more than he says, we have more to do to lower costs for hardworking Americans, but we are making real progress with wages rising faster than prices for 17 months in a row. But labor we're entering into a period of increasing unemployment. So having very high wages doesn't do you any good if you don't have a job and if prices continue to rise. So yes, this has been a problem, and I don't know how they're gonna get out of it. That tends to be inflationary. But if you have high unemployment and high inflation, you have stagflation. But it looks like inflation's coming down and unemployment's going up. That's not a good sign for the economy. Monica, they are destroying soil. Yes, I understand that. I was going to make that point, but I just was talking too much. I feel like the chemtrails, I kept wondering, like, why would they do this? Why would they do this? And I'm calling them chemtrails, whether they come out of the fuel of the planes or they're sprayed or whatever. I'm just saying the pollution that's coming out that you see across the sky is full of bad stuff. It rains down. And I kept thinking, what could this be for? Some people think it's to spread illness, whatever. Living in California, it blocks out the sun. It blocks out the sun, and sometimes it messes with the clouds so they cannot rain. I was like, okay, maybe they just don't want us to grow things outside. I think some of these guys, Bill Gates, are having like basically indoor farms, and then what's in them, as Mark is saying, gets into the soil, and it is a chemical disaster as well. Yes, that we have to deal with. Perhaps get ahead of it. I don't know how we can mitigate that, but people are still growing lots of stuff. It's still definitely working. Stella says Australia pays almost 50% tax on alcohol. Where was I reading about? Who was telling me about like Sweden or Norway having like a 500% tax on alcohol? And then when some outside party was like, you need freer markets, you need to reduce alcohol, like, no, people will die. So, but I don't know if Australia has that kind of, unless you have white knights, I feel like you're not going to have that kind of problem with alcohol. Yeah, well, our cigarettes are probably like 500%. I think a carton of cigarette. No, I think like a freaking pack of cigarettes out here is $20. That's $1 a cigarette. Now, cigarettes have a high elasticity of demand. So if we're talking about economics, people are going to pay a lot more for cigarettes than they're going to be very, they're not going to be very sensitive to price changes. But yeah, and out here, and they were complaining like crazy. Harris is going to tout her railing against oil companies for high gasoline prices when she was in California. Our gasoline prices are $5 a gallon still, or very close to that still. And I'm sure anyone who's not in California is looking at $3 or whatever. It's the same oil companies. It's not the oil companies, it's the policy. Our taxes on gas is so high. It's like probably almost European. Kat Duckness says there's a brand of, quote, organic eggs here that are $20 a dozen. What the fuck? So, do I have to like then label my video as being cursy? That annoys me. Just want to be me. Well, Grocery Outlet, for example, which isn't counted as a grocery store, but I go to, it's right down the street from my house. Everyone once in a while has those blue eggs for like $5 a dozen. I mean, I think they're medium, but I don't care with the orange yolks. So this is not a problem. And if she starts messing with it, if they start artificially suppressing the price of blue eggs, they're not going to make the blue eggs anymore. And the Grocery Outlet is perfect for this. It's perfect for this because it gets you a place where you can go and get those same foods for cheaper. You can't always get the thing you want on that day, but you could live forever if you were trapped in a grocery outlet and be very well nourished. Anyway, and their stock price is in the crapper too. So nobody's doing any very well. All right. So let us hit this last subject. Okay. So when Kamala first picked Tim Walz as her running mate, I read his wiki thing, the couple of issues that there were like 3 things worth highlighting. He's like an extreme, whatever, socialist type guy. What else is new? He probably lied about his service, and he was a little bit uncool in how he abandoned his troop or division or whatever, battalion, when they were deployed to Iraq. So he was in the reserves for like decades and then just was like, oh. He re-upped after 9/11, but just didn't show. He was like, I'm running for Congress, buddy. Sorry, I can't go. And there were letters written that said that's not how it works. He was bad for doing that. And then the other thing was his connections with China. He went over there. I don't know if he went to Harvard, but he was with the Harvard program that was like an educational exchange program with China way back in the day. And now, or in interim years, he sponsored students going to China. Like he went with them for his school. I was like, yeah, China, that's worrisome. But I didn't know if there's a smoking gun. I'm still not sure there is, although he has gone to China 30 times with these students. So he could just be an emissary. He's certainly a Sinophile, but he loves China. But I looked, and his net worth, I mean, he may be hiding something. Everyone's probably hiding something. But his visible net worth is less than $1 million, which is kind of impossible to believe, because I don't think that you could even retire on that. Certainly if you were investing it at like 0% interest. Now at 6%, you'd get $60,000 a year. You could, but you'd have to live pretty hand to mouth, like especially if it was you and your wife. So he doesn't seem, I'm sure he has something else, but he doesn't seem like he's been in bed with China for personal gain for the past 30 years. That is not what it looks like to me. There's no evidence of that. And since Biden actually has been in bed with China for the past 30 years, I think that's like in the congressional record, if I'm not mistaken. There was a House committee that kind of lays that out. And I did a show I talked about this with Sam Tripoli yesterday on Tinfoil Hats. So if you want to get the actual sources for that, listen to that show. But yeah, so Biden's clearly, and we had that thing that Gal Luft, who said James Woolsey, or person number one, who is probably James Woolsey, was going to answer the Trump administration and do the bidding of China. I mean, that's serious stuff. So I haven't found anything that makes this guy worse than that. And Peter Schweitzer, who is the source of a lot of that Biden material about Biden's ties with China, definitely, struck out at Tim Walz, saying he's in bed with China. But the best he could come up with, and he made the same point I noticed, which is he's not rich enough to really be in bed with China at this point. He said that there was something called like Global Minnesota, and Tim Walz is involved in that, and they cooperate with one of the secret police outposts that the Chinese have in 53 different countries, where this is what they say they have. I don't know how to verify this. I've read this before, where they go to Chinese citizens or Chinese or American citizens who came from China. And if they're saying bad stuff about the Chinese government, they tell them to stop. And in some cases, drag them back to China. So you've probably heard of this. Anyway, Peter Schweitzer saying that Tim Walz cooperates with those guys. There was a totally unsourced article that said that Tim Walz had been on intelligence with the CIA on all his trips to China. I have no idea. And that would not, in my mind, contradict the idea that he's also in bed with China, because after reading the Danny Casolaro octopus stuff, it's probably the wheeling and dealing is probably why the CIA wants the information, not to protect the US in some way. For sure not, is my final analysis on all of that. So I think that's pretty much all I got. Only 3 stories. Let me give you like one little couple of weird things that I saw too. I saw an article today that said a mouse's brain, when it's under stress, gives a signal to the gut biome to reduce the bacteria, good bacteria, that keeps inflammatory response in check, keeps excess immune response in check. So stress can increase inflammation, and that is the mechanism in mice anyway. So it's good to know. And for the first time, I thought, oh, like, are they suggesting that you can actually intentionally reduce your stress? I was thinking, it's like, is that something you can do? You don't just live your life as it is and just try to get it all done. I don't know. I don't know if you can actually reduce your stress. I don't know, but it's worth a thought. I don't know. CBD or DBT. I mean, there's probably something. Get your kids to graduate and take care of themselves, perhaps, unless you have a giant baby like I have. He's not super stressful, my Downs guy. Also, one thing to watch out for, heat-related deaths among young people. So I was talking to someone who sat in on a seminar, CDC thing, and that was like the what to watch out for takeaway. Heat deaths in young people. And I remembered it only because I just read this crazy article. It's like a CFR article that said there were tens of thousands of excess heat-related deaths in Europe. And I didn't get a chance to read the whole article. I'm absolutely certain it is. I would pick that number apart. Not what we're thinking. But out here, there are a lot of signs like how to avoid heat stroke. And I was on a walk with my friend, the one who wanted to impeach Gavin Newsom. And both of us, she's in way better shape than I am, but both of us, we could see the car. We were walking around a big park. We could see our car in not that far away. And we both had to stop under a tree because it was so hot. It was probably 100 degrees, but it was so hot that we were getting a little lightheaded. And I thought, oh yeah, I can imagine you could get heat stroke. But I mean, it's been 100 before. Is there I think if you're going for an hour walk in the blazing sun, and and when it's 100 degrees in a dry heat, you're probably going to have some problems. And I didn't even bring water. So, but I don't know if there's something else in the air. I don't know if the vax makes you more vulnerable. I definitely think it has circulatory issues. I think it does bad things to your blood. So I don't know what that's all about. And the last thing I will say, I saw a little thing about e-waste colonialism in Africa. I hadn't even thought about this, but apparently, under the guise of donating used electronics, the US and other countries just ship stuff that does not work and will not work to Africa. And poor people there will pull it apart and try to get parts they can use and then just set the rest of it on fire. So it's terrible. It's a terrible thing these are probably the same people who give money to organizations that cry out for more interference in Africa because they can't take care of themselves or whatever. And at the same time, so that's the whole climate change thing. I think pollution is a serious problem. Pollution is a serious problem. It is. And I'm not calling for regulation or anything. I'm just calling for, I think that is actually actively, that information, that viewpoint is actively suppressed, and carbon dioxide is, fear of carbon dioxide it takes the place of that. And I think that's intentional. Okay. I think I have yes. All right. I don't even think I have ever seen this movie, but this clip is so famous, but I don't even know if I ever saw the whole thing. So you and I are going to be watching this together for maybe you've all seen it 1,000 times. I don't know. I just wanted to see it. So I'm going to play it and I'm going to leave you with it. And thank you very much for coming. This is Monica Perez, and this has been a real newsreel, which I do live every Tuesday and Thursday at 2:00 Pacific, 5:00 Eastern, and then shortly thereafter, it appears on my feed, my podcast feed. Thanks, guys.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Beale, and I won't have it. Is that clear? You think you merely stopped a business deal? That is not the case. The Arabs have taken billions of dollars out of this country, and now they must put it back. It is ebb and flow, tidal gravity. It is ecological balance. You are an old man who thinks in terms of nations and peoples. There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems. One vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars. Petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichmarks, rims, rubles, pounds, and shekels. It is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet. That is the natural order of things today. That is the atomic and subatomic and galactic structure of things today. And you have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone. Am I getting through to you, Mr. Beale? You get up on your little 21-inch screen and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today. What do you think the Russians talk about in their councils of state? Karl Marx? They get out their linear programming charts, statistical decision theories, Minimax solutions, and compute the price-cost probabilities of their transactions and investments, just like we do. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime. And our children will live, Mr. Beale, to see that perfect world in which there's no war or famine, oppression or brutality. One vast and ecumenical holding company for whom all men will work to serve a common profit, in which all men will hold a share of stock, all necessities provided, all anxieties tranquilized, all boredom amused. And I have chosen you, Mr. Beale, to preach this evangel.
Why me?
Because you're on television, dummy. 60 million people watch you every night of the week, Monday through Friday.
I have seen the face of God.
You just might be right, Mr. Beale.